Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Sadu, and in this episode, we're going to be chatting about how to assess your fat loss progress accurately. Now, before we get rolling here, quick little disclaimer. The audio on this episode isn't the greatest because the current apartment that I'm living in right now is on a super busy street, but I cleaned it up the best I could. So first of all, why even bother assessing your fat loss progress? And the reason is you can't feel fat loss. It's not a sensation, meaning the only way to tell whether it's happening or not is if you're tracking different markers of it. Also, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients say, I feel like I'm not making any progress. And then we lay out the numbers that we've been tracking as well as assess their photos. And they're like, oh shit, okay, well, I guess I am moving in the right direction. So if you're not tracking this stuff in one way or another, it's really easy to get discouraged because, for example, if you're going by feel with something that can't be felt, you're in trouble. So all of the progress tracking methods that I'm about to lay out for you are so you can track your actual progress, but then also they're awesome reminders of how far you've come when you look back at these markers. The most important tool for assessing fat loss or weight loss is without a doubt the scale, because in this case the numbers don't lie. So if your weight is trending down week after week, you're without a doubt heading in the right direction. Now on the other hand, if your weight is staying stable or trending up, fat loss is not happening. The first question that pops up here is usually, well, what if I'm lifting weights? Am I building muscle and losing fat at the same time? And I wouldn't even take this into account just because fat loss is a much faster process than muscle gain. So in my opinion, it's not even worth accounting for this because the most common pitfall I see here is that someone thinks they're gaining the same amount of muscle as they are fat that they're simultaneously losing. And this is just highly unlikely. Now, I do have a few examples of clients that have successfully achieved body recomposition, so losing fat and gaining muscle at the same time on my website. However, their weight didn't stay the same. They still lost weight overall. And then also these individuals are typically quite lean to begin with. And this is key because the more weight you have to lose, the less likely a body recomposition scenario is likely to happen. Now we can go about using the scale to assess progress in a few different ways. So one would be weighing yourself every day, and then the other would be weekly weigh-ins. So in both scenarios, it's really important that you weigh yourself under the same conditions every time. So for example, don't weigh yourself first thing in the morning on an empty stomach after you hit the bathroom one day, and then at night after a big dinner on another day. We want to make the conditions as similar as possible, so I'd recommend first thing in the morning after you hit the bathroom before you eat or drink anything. In the case of weighing yourself every day, what you're going to do is take all 7 weigh-ins for the week, total them up, and then divide by 7, and that'll give you a daily average. So let's put an example together here. Let's say day 1 you're at 159.5 pounds, day 2 161, day 3 160.4, day 4, 160, day 5, 160.2, day 6, 159.8, and then finally day 7, 160.6. So the daily average here is 160.2 pounds. You then do that the following week, and if your daily average is trending down, you're moving in the right direction. So if it was 160.2 and then next week it's 158.5, you've made progress. Also, it's worth mentioning that the small daily fluctuations are totally normal. Don't sweat this one bit. You're not going to weigh the exact same thing every single day. And when you weigh yourself daily, you learn this super quickly. And then one more thing to note is that the bigger you are, the larger the fluctuations are going to be. So for example, if you're 120 pounds, you might fluctuate by a pound or so daily. But if you're 250 pounds, you might fluctuate by, 3 to 4 pounds per day. So the more you weigh, the larger the daily fluctuations tend to be. Now, in the case of weighing yourself once per week, you've got your digit and then you just compare it to next week's number. And again, if you're trending down, you're on the right track. Now, daily weigh-ins do have a slight advantage in the sense that they can help you identify some patterns. So for example, maybe on Sunday and Monday your weight is typically at its highest, and you seem to always be lightest on Fridays. This is super common because our habits and routines typically shift over the weekend. So Monday is often a heavier day, and Friday is usually the lightest scale weight day because you've likely been locked into your routine since Monday. Now, it doesn't really matter which day you choose to weigh yourself weekly if you go with the 1 time per week approach, but just be sure that it's the same day under the same conditions every time. Pictures are another awesome way to assess your fat loss progress because, like the scale, as long as you implement them under the same circumstances, they don't lie. So photos can be a little trickier if you're assessing them yourself, just because it can be hard to be fully objective when it comes to looking at your own body. And then you also need to know what to look for because changes week to week typically aren't huge in pics just because fat loss happens incrementally. So if you are going to use pictures, the same concept applies, of course, as far as taking them under the same conditions each week. Now, you're not going to take pictures every day because that's definitely going to be overkill, but when you do take them, I'd recommend taking them first thing in the morning before you eat or drink anything, wearing the exact same thing every time. I have my male clients wear boxers or swim trunks, and then I have my female clients wear bikinis. So go with the same outfit each week because different clothes fit differently. So we want to eliminate any outside variable in order to make it as easy for you as possible to assess your picture progress week to week. Also, I'd recommend using the same locations for your photos weekly, as well as the same lighting and picture angles, just so you can make them as similar as possible. Now, what about the mirror? Assessing your progress using a mirror can work for some folks, but to be honest, I just don't think it's the best way to go because there's nothing to compare your current self to other than a memory of how you looked before. So while you can always check yourself out and see how you're looking, the mirror just isn't a great real-world assessment tool when it comes to fat loss. On the other hand, how your clothes are fitting is an awesome input as far as whether you're making progress or not. So for example, if your jeans are fitting looser around the waist, your waist is smaller. Or if you're punching new holes in your belts, you're definitely losing fat. Now with clothes specifically, the only real thing to keep in mind is whether you just washed and or put your clothes in the dryer, because then they typically fit a little tighter. But other than that, your clothes are a great indicator as to which direction you're moving in when it comes to weight loss. Even things like shoes, rings, and watches can be an indicator of progress because we lose fat from absolutely everywhere. Shoes, rings, and watches can also be a good indicator of food intolerances and digestion. So for example, if you eat some pizza or crush a bunch of beers and you wake up the next day and you can't get your wedding ring off or your watch is fitting differently, something didn't agree with you on the digestion front because you're inflamed and your body is holding water. Now that is just on a day-to-day level, but like I said, if over time your watch, rings, etc. are fitting looser, that's likely an indicator of fat loss as well. Taking measurements can be a great way to track progress generally as well as in specific areas. So if you're going to use measurements, just be sure that you always do them under the same circumstances and do your best to make them as consistent as possible. Meaning, if you're measuring your waist, you don't want to do it at your belly button one week and just below your rib cage another. Pick a spot and track it super consistently. Also, how your clothes fit are sort of like a watered down measurement. However, actual measurements are just more specific, and then you can write them down and watch which direction they're trending in week to week too. So that's an advantage that measurements have going for them. Body fat calipers. So some folks like to use calipers. Personally, I don't have any of my clients use calipers and never have, just because I feel like there's too much room for error. But if you'd really like to geek out with these, feel free. And then as always, use them under the same conditions weekly. And like the measurements, keep the locations you measure as consistent and steady as possible. Machines and fancy tech. So there are a bunch of different machines that measure fat loss out there, like the Bod Pod, underwater weighing, DEXA, bioelectrical impedance. However, I honestly wouldn't recommend using any of these. Like the calipers, there's just too much room for error. Not to mention, most of them are expensive, and you can track your progress more accurately and more conveniently from home for free. But if you do want to hear about the specifics around each of these machine modalities, have a listen to episode number 47 titled Measuring Your Body Fat with James Krieger, where James and I went through how each machine works and how accurate or inaccurate each of them is. Now, how do I assess and track my clients' progress? I use a combination of pictures, weight, and weekly questions. So we do pictures every week under the same conditions, and I leave it up to my clients as far as whether they want to weigh themselves weekly or daily. That's their call, but we track weight as well. Now, the questions are where the specific individualized coaching really comes in, because I like to know all sorts of things, including where my clients' energy levels are. Are they feeling hungry, fully satiated, or something in between? How's their digestion, libido, daily step counts, alcohol intake, food intake, of course. How many meals out are we eating? Medications, potential stressors, sleep, appearance of their skin, water intake, menstrual cycle stuff for women. We set weekly goals as well. So we delve pretty deep on all the relevant factors of fat loss, because all of this stuff plays a role when it comes to implementing and, most importantly, sustaining your progress over the long term. Now, you might not want to track all this stuff. It just depends how detailed and specific you'd like to get. But at the very least, you've got to track your weight, because not tracking your scale weight would be like trying to save money but neglecting to track your income and spending. It's the most relevant and important marker, so I'd recommend using your scale weight as an absolute minimum tracking tool. Secondly, I'd recommend photos for a few reasons. So one is they really let you know where you're at and where you're starting from. Secondly, if you know what to look for and you're good at being objective with yourself, you can assess your progress really well with these. And then third, they're just really nice to have down the road to see how far you come. Pics are super powerful. We are adaptation machines, and our new normal gets established super quickly. So looking back at pics and seeing where you started versus where you are now can put things into perspective for you, but also potentially keep you on track. Now, zooming out a little bit, overall, one really important thing to note around assessing your progress is that 1 week or 2 weeks is not a whole lot of time in the big scheme of things. When we make real lasting change, it happens over the course of months. Now, don't get me wrong, if, like I mentioned, you're not trending in the right direction, you're not making progress. However, it's not going to happen overnight either. So consistency is really key, because we can follow any sort of short-term bullshit cleanse, detox, or fad diet for a few weeks, but if you're after sustained, legit lifestyle change, it's going to take some time. And a helpful way to think about this that can put things into perspective is, how old are you? Let's say you're 35 or 40. So it's taken you 35 or 40 years to get to this point. So it's probably going to take more than 35 or 40 days to get you to where you want to go. Now, if you're interested in personalized one-on-one nutritional coaching and or workout design with me, you can head over to n1fitness.com/coaching or click the link in the show notes below. Also follow me up on Instagram at n1fitness and friend me on Facebook at Marcus Sadu. I hope you found this episode useful. Thanks so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya.